Hi guys, my name is Dokebi and I really recently got a top 4 finish at the SCG Atlanta Riftbound 10K tournament with Viktor. And I wanted to share my deck list and explain how you guys could also find success in this last month or so of Origins with Viktor as well. In this video, I'm going to give some background about myself, my results at SCG Atlanta, talk about why you should pick Viktor as your chosen legend, how I believe the deck should be piloted, go through my deck list, and go over some common matchups towards the end. I'll make sure to leave some timestamps in the description so that you can skip to whatever portion that you're actually interested in. When Riftbound came out, I got the Viktor starter deck, and I've essentially been one-tricking Viktor since release, competing at next night skirmishes and other events with the Cincinnati Riftbound community, so shout out to them. I was really convinced that Viktor was a top tier deck and I wanted to prove it, so I signed up for the SCG Atlanta 5K and 10K to hopefully make a splash in the meta and spread the gospel of the glorious evolution. I was pretty confident I could do well, as I've been able to win 3 consecutive smaller skirmishes, and I've also gone to a 5K in Louisville in like November, and went like 5-3 back then, which isn't bad, but I did feel like I'm an infinitely better player right now than I was back then, and my deck is also just much better than what I was running back then. So my goal was to make top cut at Atlanta, top 8, on the Friday, which is the 5K, I fell a bit short by ending 16th place, but it was still not like a bad placing. And on 10K, which was on Saturday, I did manage to finish 7th in Swiss, securing top cut, and managed to finish top 4. On both days, there were a lot of Kaisa players, as you could see by this pie chart. Half of my matchups were Kaisa players. But luckily, I managed to come out on top in 8 of the 9 matches against Kaisa. The rest of the matchups were pretty even spread between Annie, Mastery, Misfortune, and Ari, and a Teemo. So I was pretty happy with how it did at the event. The event was also great. Thank you to SCG to holding a fantastic event for me. I had a lot of fun, and I hope to attend more tournaments in the future as well. But so why should you pick Viktor? Here's why Viktor is good. Viktor is a consistent deck. Because you can generate units with your Viktor legend, you'll very rarely truly break on your draw and be unable to do anything, since you can always just generate a unit with your Viktor legend. That means that you'll always have a turn 1 play. Worst case scenario, you'll do Viktor legend, and I'll also talk about later why I think that's actually the best turn 1 play when you have 2 energy. And we all know how important it is to be able to get a unit out on turn 1. So Viktor can always guarantee you that. Even later into the game, if you have some runes left over at the end of your turn, like you played all the cards that you wanted to, but you still have some runes left over, you can always round out your curve by playing more of these pesky recruits that your opponent is going to need to find answers for. I also don't think Viktor has any terrible matchups. I think the worst one, in my opinion, is Darius, because Viktor can struggle against decks that go wide, and Darius has the ability to have some explosive turns that could really be hard to come back from. But Darius isn't really a meta deck currently, so I rarely ever face Dariuses, so I don't think that's a big problem. If you play correctly and build your deck right, you can beat Kaisa reliably, as you saw in my tournament results. And I think Annie is a pretty even matchup. Mastery, I think, is pretty even as well, although I personally don't have a lot of experience in that matchup because there just aren't that many Yi players in Cincinnati. Set can be a little tricky, but it's not unplayable, and you would hard stomp any iteration of Aurora decks just because of how quickly you can get points and how easily you can kill large might units. Don't believe the Rift Dex matrix on Viktor win rates if you've seen it. This is the Rift Dex that they put out, and you can see that it looks like Viktor has terrible matchups across the board for the common legends at least. But I believe that this is just because a lot of new players like to play Viktor because A, there's a starter deck, and B, Viktor is a cheap deck. So I think a lot of the newer players just kind of don't know how to pilot these matchups, and I think a lot of Viktor players are kind of still running the older version of the Viktor Decklist, which I think is a bit outdated and perform much worse into most of these matchups, which I'll talk about the differences later. But I assure you that Viktor has great matchups across the board. None of them are terrible except for maybe Darius, as you can see over here. Um, And if you just know how to play the matchup, if you know the correct tempo to play at, you can come out on top of any of these matchups. The last reason why you should play Viktor is because Viktor is a great budget option. I always see people ask for recommendations on good budget decks to play, and I cannot recommend Viktor enough. The only expensive cards could run are Yellow Seals, which I don't think you should run in Viktor, and Thousand-Tailed Watchers, which definitely is a good card, but you could definitely work without them. As a matter of fact, the first two skirmishes that I won were actually with a Viktor Decklist that was like I think less than $30 because Viktor Leader was like the only expensive card in that list. I could share that list with you guys if you're interested in it, but I don't think, like, in retrospect, I think the list was pretty bad, and my current list is just so much better without being too much more expensive. Even if you don't want to run Thousand Tail Watchers, there are other cheaper replacements that you can make instead of it. So, on to the deck list and how I think it should be played. At game release, Viktor was like a deck that went wide, it was pretty aggressive, and it tried to win with Grand Stratagem. And after playing that style for a while, and then also moving on to this new list, I highly believe that that older ideology is suboptimal. Maintaining a large army in base while conquering up to 6 points can be difficult in some matchups, especially Kaisa, when you could just get Kathy and Reigned. And this is why people who are less knowledgeable about the matchup might think that Viktor Kaisa matchup is heavily Kaisa favor. Instead of this, go wide and push with Grand Stratagem strategy. I think Viktor should be played more as a control playstyle, beating on opponents in a battle of attrition. Now, this does depend on the matchup, and the tempo you should play at does change depending on who you're playing against. But Viktor Legend being able to give you a unit for just 1 energy every turn just puts great pressure against your opponents to be able to deal with it. If you add strong removal like Singularity, Riptide Rex, Call of the Week, Hidden Blade, even like Sprite Molder or Thousand Tail Watcher, you could run your opponents out of units while still being able to generate infinite units and be able to get up to those 8 points with Recruit. So I will go over the actual cards in my deck list. It is based off of the Best of Viktor list by Cody Williams, who I believe is a member of Challenger TCG. This is his deck list. So you can see a lot of similarities between the two lists, and I want to give credit where it is due. But I kind of took his idea even further and made a few changes of my own. And one of the main reasons I want to make this video is because I don't think Challenger TCG made a video about this Viktor deck list, and I kind of want to explain the deck list to the general population out there. So let's get on to the individual cards. Viktor Leader is going to be the chosen champion that you want to use. The blue Viktor in the current meta is not very viable in my opinion. The 3 might kind of hurts a lot. Being a 4 energy, 1 power for 3 might is not great. And I don't think Viktor is going to be having that playstyle where you're interacting too much on your opponent's turn in the current meta, of course. Stupefy is a fantastic card. Pretty much every blue deck runs it, self-explanatory. It's a good, neat little combat trick. It allows you to draw. It cycles itself. Fantastic. Hidden Blade is also a fantastic card. It has the flexibility of either being a 2 energy, 1 power, kill a unit at a battlefield. You could either use that to kill an opponent's unit, or you could just use it on your own recruit or a small value unit, or just even a unit that's going to die anyways, and you could draw for 2. Now, a lot of Viktor players do like to run Hidden Blade as card draw, but I personally like to greed it a bit and save it in my hand for an explosive like turn, like 6 point to 8 point turn at the end. Because unless your opponent is running green, there's not much they can do about this card when you're going for that double conquer at the end of the game. Purple decks could pull their units out of it, but that still allows me to accomplish my goal of getting rid of their units from battlefields. It still, of course, depends on the scenario. Sometimes it's fine to use it as draw, especially if there is a Dreaming Tree in play. It could be a draw 3 card, which is fantastic. That's a scenario where you could definitely use it that way. But for the most part, keep it in hand and save it for the end game where you're trying to get for that double conquer at the end of the game, which is going to be the main way that Victor's going to win games. I have one Daring Poro. Um, Honestly, I wouldn't really care too much what 2-drop this is. It could be a Daring Poro, it could be a Ravenbloom student. This is just my one of. I've honestly thought about just cutting this 2-drop entirely because my main 2-drop is going to be the Trefarian Glory Seeker. This has to do with its synergy with Call to Glory. Trefarian Glory Seeker has Legion when you play me, buff me, and I could spend that buff to play Call to Glory for free. And my reason for this is, like, why not run Trefarian Glory Seeker? Your other options are Ravenbloom Student, which is a good card, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's that great in Victor. It's much better in other blue decks. Because if I play one card, one spell, then it's equivalent to Trefarian Glory Seeker. And I would have to play at least 2 or more for it to be better than Trefarian Glory Seeker. So it could be better, but you would really have to commit to making your Ravenbloom student better. And I don't think, like, besides the Stupefy, Victor doesn't really have a lot of cheap spells that I can kind of throw out whenever I want to. A lot of these cards have a very specific timing where you want to play them at. I'm going to talk more about Trefarian Glory Seeker and Call to Glory later, about why it's such a powerful combo and why it possibly, like, those 2 cards alone really tip the scales in some matchups. But for now, yeah, it's a 2 energy, 3 might unit that enables Call to Glory to be played for free. Now, the one downside of Trefarian Glory Seeker is that you can't play it on turn 1 when you have 2 energy up. But I believe that when you're turn 1, 2 energy up, you should be using Victor Legend almost every single time. And that's even more important when you're playing against Kaisa or Annie. I'll explain that more later when we talk about how to play the deck. But I'll come back to that. I run one Facebreaker. It's just great for kind of denying your opponents from conquering, even if you have a single recruit at a battlefield, because if they're only pushing with 1 unit, you stun your recruit and their unit, and they're going to be recalled back to base. So I think Facebreaker is a good card in Victor. I would love to run more of them, but I kind of just had space for this one for now. Call of the Week, fantastic card. It's 99% of the time you're just going to sacrifice one of your own recruits, and you're going to be you're forcing your opponent to kill off one of their hopefully higher value targets. Call of the Week is also great when your opponent doesn't have many units, because it's just more likely that they can't just throw away another smaller unit as well. And this card is also why, like, the Darius matchup is really difficult, because they have a lot of recruits that they're willing to throw away as well. Noxian Drummer is one of our main 3-drops that we're going to look to play early. She is a pretty good card, but there are some... I do think that in the future says that she's going to be one of the first cards I replace here. So when she moves to a battlefield, she gets a 1 might recruit at the battlefield, which is good. So that's going to be the 3 might plus the 1 might recruit. That's going to be a total of 4 might pushing a battlefield. It could trade with Kaisa. It could conquer over a lot of smaller units. But I think the effect isn't that great, because if you're just pushing onto a battlefield that has a 1 might or 2 might recruit on it anyways, you don't really need the extra recruit, because it's just going to die and you're going to kill their thing. One of the main parts where she's really good is that she's 3 might, so when she moves on to a Trefarian War Camp, she's going to turn into 4 might, which is really hard for your opponents to remove, because it won't die to Hextech Ray or Gust. The other thing is, even if there isn't a Trefarian War Camp, if your opponent tries to Gust or Hextech Ray the Noxian Drummer, if they wait until after your move trigger, and they try to Gust or Hextech Ray your Noxian Drummer, your recruit will still conquer for you. So that is one of the main ways why Noxian Drummer is pretty good in those specific scenarios. If it is a Trefarian War Camp, you're also pushing with 6 might, which is excellent for 3 energy. So that's another reason why she's part of the list and why she's good. The reason why we don't run the Vanguard Captain is because Vanguard Captain A requires power, which I don't want to be burning power this early in the game, and B can't be played on like turn 1 or 2, or it's very difficult to play on turn 1 or 2, because it's going to be hard to trigger the Legion. So the only time where you could play her turn 1 or 2 would be if you have seals, but I just don't think seals are worth it for a Victor list. Lecturing Yordle, I have 2 of. I just have 2 of them because I think that's just the amount of draw that I need for this deck. The deck does have a higher end, so you don't need too much card draw. But especially since I'm trying to not use Hidden Blade for card draw, I decided that I need a few more Lecturing Yordles for this little extra bit of card draw. Faithful Manufactor, a very reliable card for Victor. It's a 3 energy, get a 2 might and a 1 might recruit. Just a fantastic card to have in pretty much any Victor deck list. If your Victor list is not running Faithful Manufactor, I'm questioning your decisions. Faithful Manufactor is just obvious. Very good card. Call to Glory, I explained earlier with the synergy with Trifarian Glory Seeker. Just a great card. I'll talk a bit more about why it's really good. It's good into Annie and Kaisa specifically for a few special reasons. A, if I'm pushing in a recruit to a battlefield, and they want to deny that point by like a hextech ray, this will kill it. Whether that's worth it or not is a different question. But Call to Glory prevents your units from being hextech rayed or even gusted, which is a pretty big deal. The other thing is if you have Victor Leader in play, which you will have sometimes, not always, but sometimes you will have Victor Leader in play. If you Call to Glory Victor Leader, it pushes Victor Leader to 7 might, which is extremely difficult for Kaisa to deal with if they don't have a Stupefy. Falling Star doesn't get you there, and a Cathian Rain would require 4 triggers of a Cathian Rain, or at least 4 instances of 2 damage now that it's been errated, to kill Victor Leader, which is a really heavy commitment to kill a Victor Leader. But Victor Leader is a card that they are going to have to kill at some point in the game. So Call to Glory just gives you so much more flexibility. I'll talk more about this later, but even if there's a reverse row in play, it also allows you to do some bluffing against your opponents to force them off and get some free conquers as well. Sprite Mother is fantastic into other aggressive decks, Kaisa and Annie once again. You can kill a lot of their early game units with the Sprite, or even if you're afraid that your opponent has a Sprite or a hextech ray in hand, you can kind of just test the waters, send the Sprite in there, and if they decide to gust or hextech ray the Sprite, then right after that you can push in with a recruit, and that's a worthy trade for you because you got rid of one of the removal tools, and you only lost a Sprite that was going to die anyways. I have 1 Imperial Decree. There's just a few matchups where having the Imperial Decree is pretty useful. Mainly talking about Aurora or more mid-range decks like Set or Master E. If you have a few recruits in your base, you could essentially board wipe. Or you could kill all the units that are at battlefields at the very least. So I run 1 of them. You could see that we're not running any more Imperial Decrees or Grand Stratagems. That's because I'm not trying to make like a super wide board. I'm just trying to have a consistent flow of recruits so that I can keep conquering, but not a super wide board so that I have this complete blowout turn to get to 8. Machine Evangel is really great into the Kaisa matchup because it's really difficult for Kaisa to efficiently get rid of the Machine Evangel and the 3 recruits it spawns with its Death Knell. They would either have to like kill it through combat and then a Cathian Rain after. And so you can either have Evangel in base so that you can't lose everything. Or if they don't have units in play, you could also just push up Machine Evangel to try to hold. Because it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to accelerate a unit, kill Machine Evangel, and the Cathian Rain on the same turn. So Machine Evangel is just a really good card. If you manage to play it early against Kaisa, that's going to increase your chance of winning that matchup by a lot. Riptide Rex, he's going to be our first like really top end card. 6 energy, recycle 2 power. It's just great for killing Darius's or Kai'Sa's against the Kai'Sa or any matchup. You can also use it to kill Tasty Faithfuls or just units from like Mastery or Ari that could be hard to kill through combat. So you could kill through these abilities instead. It's going to be the same reason why Singularity is so good. Singularity is a fantastic card. I think every Victor list should run 3 of them. It doesn't care what purple's trying to do. It kills Kai'Sa's, it kills Darius, it kills Noxus Hopeful, it kills Mastery, it kills Tasty Faithful, it kills a lot of units, it kills most units. And it can also target in base, which is very important for some matchups. So Singularity, it's very simple, just a really strong card that could remove a lot of very dangerous threats. Last card is going to be the Thousand-Tailed Watcher. For the longest time, I tried to not run Thousand-Tailed Watcher because it's an expensive card and I try to keep my decks very budget friendly. But I was going to this big 5k, 10k tournament, so I folded and I did put 2 of these in. If you do want a budget deck list, you could take out the Watchers. You could probably put in another Riptide Rex and I would probably put in like another Facebreaker, to be honest. And I'm sure that deck list would also do perfectly fine as well at like the skirmish level. Lastly is the sideboard. I'll be honest, my sideboard is a bit of a mess. I was pretty happy with my main board that I kind of didn't think too much about my sideboard. The cards that I do like is the 1 extra Imperial Decree. It's nice for the Aurora matchup or just other larger mid-range matchups like Master Yi. And a Grand Stratagem, this is mainly for the Mirror against Darius, against, once again, Aurora, and some matchups that run bigger units as well. I also like the 2 Facebreakers. This is great into the Annie matchup because Facebreaker is a really good way to shut down Vi Ride the Wind. And like I said earlier, if you can play to stop Kai'Sa from conquering, that's good. And it's just good at denying very easy conquers from your opponents. It'll require them to actually remove your units if they want to try to conquer, or at least push in multiple units. One thing I will tell you to be careful about Facebreaker is you shouldn't really try to hide it when you have like a single recruit at a battlefield. Because if that battlefield gets removed through like a hextech ray, a gust, some kind of spell, then you're going to be forced to reveal your Facebreaker and it's not going to be able to do anything. It's less of a problem with Hidden Blade because you could still target your own recruit and at least get the draw for the power that you spend to hide it. But if your Facebreaker gets removed and it's not able to do anything, then it kind of feels bad. You wasted a power for nothing. So I would have at least 2 units at a battlefield. So it's going to be harder for your opponents to actually get rid of both of them without pushing in a unit. The 2 salvages I have for Auroras and Beta Hooks, you could also run it if you're seeing up against a lot of Arena Bars or Sonya's Hourglasses. I could probably take out the salvage because you honestly don't really need it for the Aurora matchup. You're just that heavily favored in the first place with all your Cold Weeks, Imperial Decrees, and Hidden Blades. But I did expect a decent number of Aurora players to be at the tournament, so I decided to keep them in. Smokescreen is good against some mid-range decks to kind of help you be able to kill them. The power does kind of hurt it a lot though, which is why I'm not a huge fan of this card. But I could also probably take this out of my sideboard. Like I said, my sideboard is very messy. The Harness Dragon is here to kind of kill some of the bigger green decks like Mastery or even Ari. Since it's not a spell, it can't be Windwalled, which is why it's here. It's also like I might bring it in against Set since it's a kill ability, so it can't be blocked by Unyielding Spirit. So I might be bringing this in for the Set matchup as well. But honestly, 8 energy, 2 power for a 6 might units doesn't feel amazing. So this is also yet another card I might take out of my sideboard. So I'm really happy with my main board. The sideboard I do definitely think can be much better optimized. So feel free to kind of tinker about the sideboard as well. Moving on to Let's go talk about the rune split first. I have 5 order 7 runes. We're not running that many Imperial Decrees and Grand Stratagems in the main, so 5 orders should be enough to play Hidden Blades, Call the Weeks, your Machine Evangels. And we're just gonna need more Mind Runes to play all of our Singularities, our Thousand Tail Watchers, and our Riptide Rexes, and Sprite Mother as well. So that's the reason for the split. One thing that you do have to be careful is if you side in, like Imperial Decree and Grand Stratagem, it might be difficult to have the order runes to play them. So just keep that in mind when you're playing, and just know that that is going to be you might break on your order runes if you do side in a lot of order heavy runes. So that's something to watch out for. I definitely think that I do want 7 because there are not many matchups where I want to bring in Imperial Decree and Grand Stratagem or Harness Dragon. So I would still prefer this. It would be cool if you could side runes as well in the future, but this is what I settled on. For battlefields, Trifarian Warcamp, it has the Trifarian Warcamp is just a given for Victor. It has the obvious benefit as of when you push in with a lot of units like recruits, it's just gonna give you much more benefit. But it also has some other benefits for the, once again, the Kaisa Annie matchups, where if you push in units, some of them might get outside of the range of their removal. For example, if I have a 3-might unit, like a Noxian Drummer or a Sprite Mother, or even just a Sprite, and they go into the Trifarian War Camp, they move up to 4 might, which is not removable by Hextech Ray, and it's also ungustable. And that's a pretty big deal for those matchups because when you get Hextech Raid or Gust in the early game, that really hurts your tempo. So getting those early game points really helps you make a difference in those games. Valamos Lair is just great against purple decks in general, especially Annie. It also makes your Riptide Rexes very reliable because Riptide Rex only targets at a battlefield, and if your opponent has a unit at a battlefield, Riptide Rex's ability is guaranteed to hit. I'll typically go Valamos Lair first so that I guarantee my Riptide Rex less value. And if I'm against like a purple deck with a lot of like flashes or like fighter flights, I might side out my Riptide Rex when it's not Valamos in the next 2 games. The other reason I go Valamos Lair first is because it's just really good into Annie, and Annies typically run Zon Warrens first with their scrap heaps, which is a pretty powerful like starting game. And I think the Valamos Lair helps me kind of get rid of that advantage for them by kind of really hurting their ability to kind of move around the board. The last battlefield is Obelisk of Power. This is the one that I do like the least out of these 3. The idea is that I actually play this when going second, which enables me to play a 3-drop, a Noxian Drummer, a Luxury Yordle, or a Faithful Manufacturer, and our Victor Legend. I know a lot of old deck lists that run a lot of 2-drops like to play Obelisk of Power going first, but this deck list likes to play Obelisk of Power going second because we're focusing more on 3-drops. But besides that, it's for similar reasons. The part where it could get a little tricky is if, let's say, my opponent is running Arena's Greatest because they're going first. Obelisk of Power does give them an extra rune as well, which could really accelerate their game plan. My counterpoint is that if I start the game at 4 runes, I do unlock access to Riptide Rex, Singularities, and Watchers earlier, which can really shut down their game plan. But I would need a little bit more testing to see if it's really worth the Obelisk of Power at the current point. The 2 greatest simple tips of how to play this deck that I'll tell you is, I've mentioned this earlier. Turn 1, if you're at 2 runes, tap Victor Legends. Just get a recruit and just pass. It's okay. That recruit can still conquer. And even if you played like an actual 2-drop, like a Daring Poro or a Trifarian Glory Seeker, they all still get Hextech Raid or Gusted. And so it's the same result. But if they decide to Hextech Ray or Gust a recruit, you now have hand advantage. They are down 1 crucial spell for this matchup that they can no longer use for your set Daring Poro, Trifarian Glory Seeker, Noxian Drummer, any of these 3-drops as well. So That's why I believe that you should always play recruit when you're going first on turn 1. If you're going turn 2, or if for some reason you have 3 energy on turn 1, then you could just play a 3 drop, or you could also just play a 2 drop plus a recruit. That's also fantastic. Especially when you're playing against Aurora, since you know that they're not really going to be doing much for their first few turns. If possible, you want to get 2 units out on your turn 1, whether it be with a Faithful Manufactor or with like a 2 drop plus a recruit, or even a 3 drop plus recruit with Obelisk of Power. That allows you to double conquer on the next turn, which really accelerates your game plan and puts pressure on the opponent's Aurora player. The other tip I have is how many runes you should be at. In the early game, I would really highly advise you not to be spending power. It could be fine to spend like 1 power for like Sprite Mother or even the Machine Evangel, because they're just powerful tempo cards to play. But I don't think you should be playing Hidden Blades too early. I don't think you should be hiding Face Breakers too early. I don't think you should be playing Victor early as well. Just try to keep your rune economy up by just playing a lot of these cards that don't have any rune power costs. Because you want to get to at least 7 runes. 7 runes is the bare minimum that you want to be at. And that's because you are able to play Singularity, you're able to play Riptide Rex, and you're able to play Victor Legend right after. And why that's important is you could just keep Singularitying and Riptide Rexing back to back to back, and yeah, you'll get rid of all your opponent's units. But if you're not able to develop your own units, you're not really gaining too much by that. On the other hand, if you do play a Singularity and a Recruit, you got rid of their units, and you could probably push up your Recruit the next turn into a free battlefield. And just having that constant Victor Legend going and just generating you more and more recruits every turn is really valuable. So just make sure to be spending your legend as often as possible. Don't ruin your whole turn just to save 1 energy to play the legend. But if your turn does allow you to play for the legend, then do so. The other reason why 7 is good is because you could play an unaccelerated Thousand-Tailed Watcher, and if you already have a board, that could be good enough. But like I said, 7 is the bare minimum number of runes you want to be at. If you are able to be at 8 or higher, that's fantastic. If you're at 8, you could still play these large 6 energy units and play another 2-cost card like a Call of the Week, a Facebreaker, a Hidden Blade, or even like a Trifarian Glory Seeker. So 7 is bare minimum. 8 is good, and 9 and above is fantastic. If you're able to maintain that rune economy, you should be in a very good place to win your game. Now, some other examples of specific game states that I want to talk about is, this was my example earlier about how if I just have like a single recruit and let's say a Hidden Blade or a Facebreaker, it's gonna be or this could be a Facebreaker as well. If my opponent just gusts or like hextech raise this recruit, then my hidden card is just going to disappear, which is bad value. So especially if it's a Facebreaker. So if you're trying to hide a card, especially a Facebreaker, I would always recommend that you have at least 2 units there. So they're going to need at least 2 different ways, 2 different spells typically, to get rid of your recruits to actually get rid of your hidden cards, like a Facebreaker. The other example is why Call to Glory is a huge threat. There's a Call to Glory. So let's pretend that I have like a board state that looks something like this. And let's say that my Trifarian Glory Seeker does have a buff. If I'm playing against a Kaisa player, and they want to, let's say, Falling Star, my Noxian Drummer, and my Trifarian Glory Seeker, which looks enticing, I could essentially say play Call to Glory for free, even if I have no runes, to save my Noxian Drummer. And that's honestly like the lowest value Call to Glory they could have. Where Call to Glory gets really spicy, let me get rid of some of these extra cards, is let's say at the other side of this reverse row, which Kaisa players like to run a lot, there is like a Kaisa there. I could push in with, let's say, like a faithful manufacturer, and I'm gonna give them the opportunity to retreat or just to pull back their Kaisa using the reverse row trigger. Now, in the current state, my faithful manufacturer would just die because it's 2 might against the 4 might of Kaisa. But because I have this buff at a Trutharian Glory Seeker, there's a real threat that I'm going to be able to buff my Faithful Manufacturer to 5 points, which will both kill Kaisa and conquer the battlefield, which will be a huge blowout turn. Now, this depends on how risk averse you are. You could do this if you have Call to Glory. You could even do this if you don't have Call to Glory because you're bluffing that you do. And so, but that's a choice that I'll leave up to you. Now, let's say I do have Call to Glory. I buff it up to 5. They're still at 4. They didn't use the reverse row trigger. And they cannot avoid this trade. Even it will be very difficult for them to avoid this trade. Even if they Void Seeker, my Faithful Manufacturer still has 1 health. But it's still 5 might, so it's going to trade with the Kaisa, and I could push up with another unit right after to conquer. So that's why Call to Glory, especially on reverse row, is great. The final scenario where reverse row is where Call to Glory is best is actually if you have a Victor in play. Let's say I have this pretty strong board today, or honestly, let's just make it a little bit weaker, I guess. Let's say this is the board that I have. The Kaisa player might try to play the Cathian Rain, and they'll spend their triggers on Faithful Manufacturer, 2 on Glory Seeker, 1 in Recruit, and 2 on Victor. Why Trutharian Glory Seeker is great is because A, it requires 2 triggers of Cathian Rain to kill it, so it's already taking away a lot of pressure off of my other units. And the other thing is that I can spend the buff, play Call to Glory for free, buff Victor by 7, and now everything else will die, sure, but they will immediately be replaced by new recruits, which kind of means that their Cathian Rain did a whole lot of nothing. I think it killed 1 recruit from the scenario I described. But they spent 7 energy and typically 2 power to kind of to kill 1 recruit and turn 2 of my units into recruits, which is terrible value for them. If they wanted to play around this, they would have to put 4 triggers of a Cathian Rain into Victor, which at that point, you're also happy taking that trade as well. The last part of this video is going to talk about some of the common matchups you'll be going up against. The first one is Kaisa. I know I've been kind of like beating this into your heads already, but Kaisa is the deck to beat along with Annie. This is just the PVG Orlando deck list. For all of these matchups, I'll just have like a common, typical deck list and just talk about cards to watch out for and cards that you're going to look for in your own deck. We've talked about Call to Glory plenty enough. Singularity does a great job at killing high-value targets like Darius, Noxus Hopeful, Kaisa, and with a little bit of assistance, it could even kill a Thousand Tail Watcher. So Singularity has great value. Riptide Rex has similar value where it can kill like all those same units if they're a battlefield, but it also develops a pretty sizable unit that could be a little bit more difficult for Kaisa players to kill, since it's outside of the range to kill from both of their cheap removal at least. They could still Falling Star it, and a few ticks of a Cathian Rain could kill it, but it's going to require more commitment from them. And if they spend 2 triggers of a Falling Star to kill Riptide Rex, then that just allows you to go wider since they spent their Falling Star killing 1 unit. Like we mentioned earlier, Machine Evangel can be really hard for Kaisa players to kill efficiently. So if you're able to play one of these early on, then you should be in a pretty good position for this matchup. Annie is another matchup that would be pretty common. This is the first place Houston list. Facebreaker is important to have this in this matchup because it's really good at beating out the Vi Ride the Wind combo, which is how many Annie players like to finish out their games. Because it'll stun the Vi, which will prevent Vi from conquering. Vi will recall back to base, and even though they recall back to base readied because of Ride the Wind, they'll still be stunned, which prevents Vi from being able to conquer any other battlefields. Sprite Mother is great because in this matchup, you really want to play like toe to toe against the anti player. You don't want to let them get too large of a lead because they could kind of just run away with it. So your sprite is great at removing all of their small units like Pouty Poro, Sneaky Deckhand, and like Traveling Merchant. Singularity and Riptide Rex are here for the same reasons. They're great at killing Kaisas, Dariuses. Some lists would run Noxus Hopeful. And even killing Vi is a pretty good deal as well. Just the advice I would give you is just be careful about gust. That's the biggest thing. It's typically fine if your recruit gets gusted, but you could typically play around it with a sprite mother. And fight or flight and ride the wind are always something to be watching out for when you're playing against Annie. This is Mastery slash the Aurora matchup. You should have a pretty good time into Aurora decks, just because you're able to score pretty quickly. You're one of the few decks that have a pretty reliable way of double conquering on your second turn, which really puts pressure on the Aurora player. But the main reason is just have so many kill spells that can kill all of their large units. Call of the Week is the main card that you want this matchup. Hidden Blade is also great at finishing out games, and Imperial Decree and Grand Stratagem could really wipe out even some impressive looking boards from the Aurora player. Just the mid-range mastery, I have a little bit less experience with. I think it's pretty even. You're gonna be looking for the same cards, and also maybe Riptide Rexes and Singularities, but you are gonna have to be careful about coming across any wind walls or unyielding spirits that masteries might be running. The set matchup can be a little tricky. My main advice would be trying to kill multiple of their units on the same turn. So don't just like call the weak once on one turn and then just like pass. You could try to kill a unit through combat and then call the weak because their legend would be tapped. Or you could Singularity and call the weak right afterwards, which would give you typically like 3 kills against units. And they're only going to be able to save 1 unit. If they ever have a time where they have like a high value unit that doesn't have a buff, like a Set, Kiana, Fiora, or Lee Sin, then that's prime time to be trying to kill them with spells like Singularity, so that you don't have to deal with the legend ability. This could be tricky because of Unyielding Spirit can really shut out your Singularities and Riptide Rexes. So sometimes I might side out like one of them, and Sabotage can really rip out valuable cards from your hands. Call the Weak and Hidden Blade are both good just to get you that final push to double conquer at the end. Imperial Decree is also great at some, especially like the yellow set list where they try to kind of like bunker up on a battlefield. Imperial Decree is really good at breaking those holds. And Thousand Tail Watcher is just an excellent card for kind of breaking holds and killing a lot of their units as well. The team up matchup, I would say, is Viktor favored. The main reason is because Teemo does kind of rely on Dr. Mundo, but because of his kill spells, Dr. Mundo can be difficult to make work reliably. I know many Teemo players will just completely side out Dr. Mundo in their second games. They might run like a Mega Mech instead. It's still like a large body, but at least they didn't pay power to do so. I would just say that this is, you really have to be careful with, once again, gust, so that you don't lose tempo early on because of a important gust. And you just have to play around all of their hidden spells. So I would say that this is a Viktor favored matchup, but it is definitely a very skill intensive matchup because you have to be able to consider all of the different hidden cards that they're running and how you would best like dissect that situation. I think Sprite Mother is pretty good because it could kind of kill a lot of their smaller units and maybe force them to flip out Teemo. And I think just being able to trade, even if you don't conquer that turn, if you can manage to kill Teemo early on, I think that's a big win for Viktor. Singularity is also important here because it kills Ember Monks pretty cleanly, as long as they only have one hidden card hidden. And it could kill most of their other units as well, besides the two big Thousand Tail Watcher and Dr. Mundos. And so that'll be it for my video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'll make sure to answer any questions that you guys might have. I hope this was really helpful for kind of give you like a different perspective on how to play Victor. And I hope it really helps you guys get some last month skirmish wins before we move on to Spirit Forged. If I do have any updates for Victor specifically, I might post more in the future, but we'll see about that. If you guys have specific content that you want to see, you could let me know. I might do some gameplay to kind of show how I pilot some of these matchups. But Victor does seem to be in a better spot for Spirit Forged as well. So I'll be continuing to play Victor into Spirit Forge, and maybe I'll do some content then as well. But thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my guide.